This podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today.
Hello and welcome to Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations, the show that elevates the conversation about cannabis to a higher level. On today's show, we welcome Jennawae Cavion, who is the founder of Calyx Trichomes, a licensed cannabis retailer based in Kingston, Ontario. She is also the executive director of NORML Canada, the national organisation for the reform of marijuana laws. After fighting for decades, there is finally legal cannabis in Canada, but there is still a lot of work to be done. Despite federal legalisation, NORML is still necessary to fight against negative stigmas against cannabis use, missing and incomplete information and research, bureaucracy, and to clean up the fallout of Prohibition. With a decade and a half working with cannabis, Jennawae possesses an encyclopaedic knowledge of cannabis and has experience in both legacy and legal markets. Jennawae's passion is converting others from the unregulated market over to the regulated market, in which she and so many others fought hard to establish. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It helps us beat the algorithm because talking about cannabis kind of gets you in a little bit of trouble on some of these things. So if you can leave us a review, it really does help the show get to a wider audience. Also, if you have any suggestions for the show, like guests you think should come on, questions you want to ask, get in touch at giveandtoke@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram at giveandtoke. But for now, please enjoy my conversation with Jennawae Cavion. So prior to cannabis, you worked at BlackBerry in Waterloo, Ontario back in the late 2000s. Have you seen the movie that came out late last year?
Yes, yeah, that was exactly like at the time, like it really depicted the time that I worked there, funny enough.
So what did you think about the accuracy of the movie? Like I loved it. Glenn Howerton's a favorite actor. I love Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I'm sure there was some creative license taken, but how was the accuracy of that film?
Well, there's a few funny things. Like I was like a report of Mike Lazaridis. Like I was in the data side of it. I even have a patent with them too, which is funny. But it was all very accurate, I would say. It was like very accurate and the vibe was very accurate. Like I remember when they launched the Storm, like I was on the beta team for the Storm and I remember when they launched it, that was their touch screen. Internally, it was called the iPhone killer. Like they were so sure it was going to be done and it was very intense. Like my job was in a 24-hour, there was like a center where we all had to take turns working overnights in case things went down. It was called the knock. And they referred to the knock in the movie a couple of times, like somebody called the knock, which was our office. And the part that was really like messing me up was that they would go into the knock, but that wasn't the right building. They were going into a different building than what the knock actually was. So the buildings were not right, but the content was.
Yeah, a bit of creative license there, but it sounds like overall that it was pretty true to form. So that's good to hear. I mean, it's a really great
really
movie.
Accurate.
And I think there's probably, I might be reaching here, but there's probably some parallels to be drawn about like the cannabis industry and BlackBerry of like, not giving up when you think you're at the top. You got to keep fighting, you got to keep trailblazing, you got to keep trying new ideas. So I think that will match our theme pretty well today.
Yeah, that's another interesting thing about cannabis too, is that everybody in this industry comes from a different walk of life and has different, background, prior experience, prior to legalization. But like we were heavily involved, my husband and I, after we left Kitchener-Waterloo, we moved to Kingston and started a head shop and seed bank pre-legalization. So we had a lot of, like in 2010, that was our other big job. So we were rated in 2017. And then the week after, the Cannabis Act was announced. I remember reading the first draft of the Cannabis Act just the week after we were rated. And it felt daunting to me. It felt really like, oh, we're not going to be able to open up with seeds again. Like we have got to pivot. And in Ontario, it was a little bit different than BC. Like every province here is, as you know, legislated a little bit differently. And BC is very pro harm reduction, but the licensing and the way that they did their cannabis licensing was really weird and expensive and prohibitive for a lot of people. Alberta was good and also very prohibitive. Like, we wouldn't have been able to operate in Alberta because of our seed charges. I mean, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, they have a fully different, some have a little bit of vertical integration, but like basically only a few companies were granted. And in Ontario at the time, it was going to be public sale in the sort of archaic way that Ontario does alcohol sales right now. And they thought there was only going to be a need for 4 stores in the whole province, in the country's biggest province, which is crazy. So we were vocally against that. And for a very brief moment in time, supportive of the Ford family, of famous Rob Ford crack scandal fame.
yeah. The big guy in the Toronto Maple Leafs jersey. He has made his way. That visual has made his way over the ocean here.
It has. You guys, like, I mean, you had to have heard. Like, it was crazy. But his brother had actually a really inclusive and, I would say, decent plan for cannabis retail. So,
well, a broken clock can be right twice a day. So it's Doug Ford got that one right.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of wrongs he's done, but I do truly believe that Ontario has done it the best and rolled out legalization the best. But each province, and then the Maritimes is fully different because there is a combination of like public and private sale over there, and it's a mess. And it's the stores, some of them are really terrible, the public ones. Now we're sort of at the stage a couple of years in where, you know, of course, at first there's a lot of frothiness and everybody was trying to get into retail and get licensed. And now we're a few years in, and there's a lot of burden that comes with being in the cannabis industry at this point, because a lot of rules are still very restrictive and prohibitive, and it makes it really difficult to do business in the cannabis industry generally. So it's been a lot of success for the government because they can claim that it's success and they've been very profitable. But when I'm not the executive director at NORML Canada, I'm a cannabis retailer. I own a couple of stores in Ontario. So and retailers, quite frankly, are in the best position. It's the growers, and especially the small growers, that are feeling the hurt the most. But the provinces are doing great. They're making the most money. So, but yeah, so there's a lot of things that we need to work on to make it a viable success, because we're a few years in and there's a lot of consolidation happening, and we're going to probably continue to see that probably until the end of 25.
There's a lot there to talk about, and I'm really glad that you kind of led in with that summary, because we're going to go down the path of, you know, how Ontario did it, the OCS. We're going to talk about your experience as a store owner, and then also your experiences in NORML. So that's a really nice lead into where we're going to go with this conversation. But I guess before we get to those points, I want to know why it is you care about cannabis so much. You know, what's your personal relationship with cannabis? How did you come to, you know, be advocating for this, to be working in this, to love this so much?
Well, cannabis is what brought me and my husband together. So our business and being in the industry and all of the experiences we've been able to have from our little store in Kingston, Ontario, like, we've traveled the world because of this store and the industry generally. So I think being involved pre-legalization and doing it when there was, I mean, we were selling seeds at a time where, you know, child molesters would go to jail for a shorter period of time than growers. You know, so because the prime minister before our current prime minister that legalized was like a tough on crime conservative, and he introduced a lot of really harmful bills, most of which have been repealed, but famously the omnibus crime bill, where there was mandatory minimums. It was just ridiculous. It was completely unconstitutional. But anyhow, so as Canada always does, you don't, you know, vote new people in, you vote people out. So people were getting sick of that. And I think legalization came at just the right time. But for us, you know, doing it in those sort of risky days for the first formative years, it really exposed us to a lot, to patients, advocacy to being involved in different, protests and seeing how it's progressing over the world, but mostly as somebody who was otherwise, a rule follower. Cannabis to me is the perfect example of government abuse and how the legal system can change things for the better. And historically, we need to make up for the wrongs at this point. And also a matter of harm reduction, because once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it gets kind of hard not to say, well, how bad are mushrooms?
Yeah.
How bad are, I don't like using logical fallacies, but it's sort of a slippery slope in a good way, because you've got psychedelics that have been proven to help, especially with depression and other things like that. So it's just a matter of time before, prohibition generally is looked at more seriously. And in BC, they were really great about sort of leading the charge on that. And of course, it's not like a silver bullet, but I think what has been done up to this point has been wrong. I think it's cost a lot of lives, and it all starts with cannabis.
Are you able to paint a bit of a picture for what the East Coast's legacy market was like? I got to experience BC post-federal legalization and the way it pretty much removed the legacy market and destroyed the legacy market and didn't factor in the people that had come from it. So what was the experience like, over Eastern Canada prior to federal legalization?
Well, in that sort of limbo period, me and my husband were trying to pivot because we knew we wouldn't be able to compete with the government in selling bongs next door to them, which was our best bet. So it was really chaotic. And then even once Doug Ford was elected and everything was going through, of course, COVID happens, but also they had a lottery. And the lottery was a total joke and a complete mess. And, a lot of people hacked that system. So there was more chaos. So it's even post legalization, while the dust settles, there's been a huge uphill battle while everybody finds their place and fights for their place, more importantly.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that lottery? Because as you mentioned, every province did things quite differently. I've had Jesse Lavoie from Toba Grown on the show to explain how Manitoba did things very differently. I've had a bunch of people from the west coast of Canada. How did that lottery system work? Because I do remember that as we were operating in tandem over in BC, we just kept hearing how hard it was to get a license, how hard it was to get your store open. You're paying rent, you're paying licenses, or you're paying certain fees, but you still can't get in the door.
Yeah. So we knew as soon as Doug Ford got elected that there would be a selection process of something to begin with. So we started building our second store, our new store right away. That would just be for kids. We got the advice because we had previously had the raid. We got the advice to create a whole new brand just for legal cannabis. So we had a whole second store away from our main store. And honestly, it was a better location anyways. And we had to carry that lease for basically 2 years before we were able to legally apply. And I mean, it was done. We had higher security requirements than even the province required. And we were ready to go to their standards for 2 full years. And we were already operating as soon as legalization was announced. We were already operating with clean noses. We were, we had to really get some redemption. Ultimately, we were pardoned for the raid that we were involved in. So we don't even have criminal records now. Even the police who arrested us gave us recommendations to get our licensing. So we were ready.
That's
they were wild. Really sweet guys and just operating because allegedly we imported seeds from Europe. So we got arrested, but it was only I can't pretend some of the other activists have spent way more time in jail than we did. We were only in there for a few hours and they let us out by dinner. But anyway, so the lottery was crazy. The first time, I think there was 50,000 entries or something like that. I can't remember. We were number 652, which meant 651 people had to blow it in order for us. But even still, in order to enter the lottery, like they said, only like people, like it wasn't clear enough to know how the rules could be gamed. So we thought we were only allowed to have one entry. There were a couple of groups who completely just like stuffed the ballot box and got like 20, like had several stores in the lottery process, which was crazy to see and like infuriating to see as somebody who has been ready to go. And like, we're using our head shop money to fund this. We're not a huge corporation. It was really infuriating. And so finally, in like the first week of January in 2020, I think it was like January 5th, 2020. Well, there was a second lottery before that, and we landed even lower on the list. But again, the same groups stuffed the ballot box, played the system, and won a crazy amount of ballots. So, okay, great, like great, perfect. And not only that, you have to remember that during this time, while we're like, we had an election, so it's fine. It makes sense that there was time. They were sort of like lying about why they kept wanting to do the lotteries because they thought there was a supply issue. But really, I think that there was an issue setting up the provincial wholesaler, the OCS. I think that if I'm not mistaken, they had an issue getting banking as the government agency.
Yeah, that seems to be a common thread. The big banks don't want to bank with cannabis.
Period. Not even if it's a crown corporation.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like that's crazy. So I think that there was some real issue, like logistical issues that needed to be worked out. And so they were buying time. So finally, in January 2020, we were able to submit our application. And I submitted it at like 12:00:01 a.m. Like I hit submit. I was ready to go. And within like 2 weeks, they were like, okay, we're ready to look at your license. It was amazing. And like that feeling, that achievement, that was like real triumphant. But then because of who we were, we had to go through some pretty like serious OPP interviews just to see if we would be honest people, I guess. That was a little much. And really, we have to, if you think about the lottery time when there were stores running, like they were making a lot of money, but I think they were really poorly supplied, and I don't necessarily think it's the best to be the first at the table. I think it's the best to be the best at the table. So I think they bore the brunt, and licensed producers, everybody in early legalization bore the brunt of having to figure out the kinks.
I worked for the 6th store open in Vancouver, and we navigated the usual kind of like, oh, this bud sucks, fuck this Trudeau weed, all that kind of stuff. And, within 6
to 8 months. But you can't even know. How can you know?
Exactly. And that's really difficult to give customers a quality experience when you don't know what's coming through the door.
Yeah. And also, like, from a licensed producer perspective, they're beholden to whatever the standards of some random people working for the government are, like as far as their production goes. And and it's the same issue with like public liquor, like with the LCBO, because there's some really special wineries in BC that I just can't get in Ontario. Like we're in the same country. How is it that I can get something from literally New Zealand, no problem, but I have an issue getting it from like Kelowna?
It's an interesting ownership model, and just for the Australian listeners in particular, I'll explain what was going on in BC, and that was the BC Liquor Distribution Board would have all the cannabis on hand in their big, poorly air-conditioned warehouse, and when they decided, they would then ship it out to the stores, and so they had a monopoly on wholesale and on retail. So I understand the OCS operates in a similar way. So talk to us a little bit about that OCS monopoly, or that heavy hand of the OCS.
Well, I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me, because I will I will be honest that their current CEO, David Lobo, love him. Like he's a real straight shooter, really personable dude. He's the right person for that job. And a lot of the company, they've made a lot of progress, but like as somebody who's done wholesale distribution in the past, the biggest issue, and also as a truck driver's daughter, I will say the biggest issue that wholesalers have to realize is that they're not in necessarily only the product business, they're in the logistics business. And the logistic issues at the very beginning were crazy. Like we would receive, I think the earliest I had to be at the store was 4 a.m. to receive, like with guys with guns.
Yeah, they turn up in the bulletproof vest and have guns. It was wild, wasn't it?
Like I received today and it's like and it was one boxes one by one. They would be there for like, and you have to count them all, right? So, one by one, I've got like 450 boxes, something like that, because like all the boxes are like little cases. This is even before edibles like were available on the market. So it was, as soon as edibles came, the boxes for those are like tiny. So I made one request. I'm like, can you just like, even if you're charging me like a little bit more, you will make up for the cost of a box with all the stuff in it. You will make up 1,000 times over in the efficiency because we can get it unloaded in under 5 minutes as opposed to an hour.
It was crazy, wasn't it? And has that changed for you? Like, have you seen those changes come through?
So now a great example, like we get a call a half an hour before the car. Well, usually we should get a call a half an hour before the order is going to get there. And we have an order window, which is at least like within normal business hours. Like I'm not like, and we were getting deliveries on Fridays too. So if I'm getting there for 4 a.m. and I'm there until 9 p.m., like my first couple of years in operation was also like, it was 2020, like June 2020 is when we opened. So it was like peak COVID. So like there was a lot of like pivoting and changing that we had to do during that process. And to be fair, the OCS had to pivot and change that way as well. Like I understand that. But now things come in a box, like something so small, like, yeah. So they're definitely receptive of feedback. The OCS got ripped pretty hard at the very beginning because of how stupid their logo is. And they paid like $660,000.
Oh man!
Like, you know what? I would have given them such a good deal for their logo.
Yeah, I've got a Canva account. I could have done this for $20.
Like, oh, it's so simple. It's a circle, and the OCS $660,000.
Wow,
like,
that's so frustrating.
That contract.
We're in the wrong business. Clearly, we should be in graphic design.
Yeah, I like nice things, certainly, and I can anyhow. So but by 2021 we were named the #1 retailer in our region, which is everywhere in Ontario east of Toronto and like south of the northern region. So
right,
yeah, and we've managed to like maintain a really high status. We opened up a second store. It's going great, and everything gets better with time. Like everything, they start to realize like, okay, we are spending a lot of money on stupid things, and maybe this would be more efficient, but you have to start somewhere. So I would say the OCS has, at the beginning I would have given them, and including the selection was terrible. Like I'm sure you guys saw, I've been to BC post legalization. I've seen what's available and it's basically the same stuff. So it's like, that's a thing. And of course, only like large producers were able to supply. But now, as Health Canada legislation sort of makes things more accessible and more normal for licensed producers, the same thing's happening, at least in Ontario. Like they're super receptive of feedback, and they are people and they're trying their best.
That's promising to hear, because I do think, like, I remember my early days as a bud tender dealing with some of the, the angriest positions from the angriest people who, might never be pleased. But something that is important to remember is this takes a significant amount of time. Your work with cell phones is proof of that. Like, how long did it take for us to go from a wired phone to an iPhone that actually works? We're talking a proper century here, and we're going to need similar time for cannabis to work out. But it's great that you have that optimism.
Yeah, even the product selection is bomb. Like we've had, it's gone. it's, what's that quote? You have to like appreciate the sour, like
Yeah,
to appreciate
the
you
sweet.
know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
definitely.
we've seen some bad weed. Don't get me
For sure.
wrong. And there's different stuff at different price points, and there's still bad weed out there, but there's some really good weed out there too. And so it's like, especially once you start to travel outside of Canada and you see what other places have weed available, Las Vegas, California. I haven't been to New York post legalization yet, but I'll be going. I'm not crazy about going to the US. I'm sure
Yeah,
you understand.
100%. Yeah. Having traveled through the US during a Trump government shutdown, I definitely understand your hesitation there.
The main thing is that Canada's weed and selection and quality it's among the best in the world. Like, at least if you were just walking off the street into any store, it's great. And the thing is, having a central agency that makes equal access for everybody is really important. So that's why having the OCS is a pro. And I think we need to modify it a little bit to also allow small producers to, like, yes, that's a central agency, but outside of that, you can also have a private sale somehow. That would be ideal.
Yeah, well, they're doing that in BC with the farm to table experience where
Exactly.
small producers can now sell directly to a store. And, I know even Toba Grown are doing this in Manitoba, and they can get products to stores within 48 hours or something like that. So it increases the freshness, it increases the quality, it broadens the product selection. Even as a business owner, like I worked for a liquor store before I started working in cannabis, and the relationships you build with certain suppliers means that you might get some exclusive things to you. So like you said, there's very similar products across the country, but it's when you get those little special ones, those small batch ones, that it gets even more exciting.
Well, exactly. And it's like the other sort of issue with the way the legislation is that, like, the big corporations and the small corporations both have access to the same stuff, yes, but not everybody is participating in a kickback scheme, which is a whole other thing, because we're not allowed to. However, I have zero tolerance for risk generally. I sleep so much better at night when I'm not worried about the police coming.
Yeah, I think we're kindred spirits in that. I'm so risk averse. I'm so scared of authorities. So I think, yeah, it's a good way to be.
That's the thing. So, like, there's not very many layers between the guilty party and me if something goes wrong. Like, it's everything's on our shoulders. So we try to keep our noses as clean as possible. And I think that some larger corporations feel more comfortable making deals with other large corporations to move quantity, because there's also sort of, I understand the need to move product that way, but I feel like there deserves to be some sort of accountability for that somewhere. And, because it makes it difficult for small operators to be able to, like, it's not exactly equal access. It's not exactly a level playing field. Business is business, and we can win on other things. So that's fine. But if we were able to just openly make those types of deals, I would have no issue making those types of deals with licensed producers myself. I think that's the main challenge, I guess, at this point in legalization, is that it is difficult to compete when people aren't following the rules as written.
You obviously mentioned the success that your store, Calyx Trichomes, has had in terms of being successful in the region. Tell us a little bit about the store. What can the customers expect as they walk in? What's the experience that's unique to your two locations?
Well, there was a strong trend of like Apple stores, and we wanted to be a little bit more true to our roots. When we decided on the name Calyx Trichomes, we wanted something, because we didn't know what the naming, like what would be allowed provincially, if they were, like, when we had to decide this stuff. So we went with Calyx Trichomes because we thought that it was innocuous enough that it's just plant anatomy. And also on, it's a pain to write in an email, and to like have to spell out the email all the time. But, if somebody's walking by, they're not going to clutch their pearls. And honestly, we have such a good team. So basically, We have a very graphic, we have murals that are, we have 20-foot ceilings and 18-foot murals of like macro views of cannabis and bud shots. So the way that we wanted you to feel was that you were a ladybug on the plant.
That's really cute.
Yeah. Which my husband rolls his eyes when I say that, but I'm like, okay, well, I designed it and that's what I wanted it to be.
Well, he's not the executive director of NORML Canada, is he?
Exactly. He loves that, I guess, for us. But anyhow, when you walk in, we have what we knew we needed right away was a place for fast-paced people and slow-paced people. Some people really want to look over the menu and some people want to be in and out. So we had like an express line for people who were just like picking up their online orders. And then we have like, we call it Question Island, where there's somebody standing there to answer any of your questions. Like our sales approach is also like, we have a lot of like loyal customers from many years ago that still like that used to buy seeds from us and now buy some seeds from us, but that's still not a great market in Canada. But also they're buying weed from us in the off season anyways. And it's really like special and sweet to see. So we have a very friendly environment with a lot of our customers, and Kingston's a small town anyways, like everybody knows somebody. And it's a very chatty place. And what we really like to have is like a friendly conversation that happens then in a weed purchase, as opposed to like a super high pressure or a super technical sales environment. The thing about Kingston is there's an aging population here, and they're not very comfortable with computer screens. And another thing that I learned, because we had time to seethe and wait for our license, we had like 2 years to wait. What we did was look at other stores and see what we thought they were doing right or wrong. And I thought that having samples in jars for us wasn't right, because we have to buy all of the samples and they look really ratty and smell pretty crappy after
you get a few hours out of them before you've wasted
exactly.
$50 putting something in that jar.
Exactly. So that's like a big one for us, is that we just have like a really comprehensive menu that's like always like it's always accurate with like package dates and everything. And our staff work really hard at keeping, the website really accurate and really easy and clean to use. So that's another, I think it's just like we really know our market and we're really comfortable here, which is why we've been so successful. But yeah, the vibe is just, it's pretty fun and it's lighthearted. And I mean, we're living the dream and we're selling weed.
Yeah. Government sanctioned drug dealers. It's a pretty good feeling, huh?
All of the like politics and little things that we need to fix aside, I'm happy to be a part of making those little changes, because listen, we all know that in order to sell it to the super conservative people, there had to be like strong boundaries in place. And now that the sky hasn't fallen, certain things can start to loosen up a bit. They can start, and they already have, like I say, like the OCS has improved. It's night and day from the first year. There's still room for improvement, but I would say like it's gotten way better. Like at first there wasn't even a website. Like we used to have to send Excel files.
Well, I think that's a good lead into our deeper conversation about NORML. But before we get there, I'm hoping you might be up for a short 60-second quiz called Hotbox. This is something I like to do regularly. So there's a bit of pressure on this one. It's a would you rather style question. So I'll throw some options at you and you tell me which one you prefer. Does that sound all right?
1000%.
All right, let's do this. Best thing about the cannabis industry?
The people.
Worst thing about the cannabis industry?
The people.
Indica, sativa, or hybrid?
I don't believe in any of those. I think that at best case, it's slang for growers, but at worst case, it's insidious marketing.
Oh, so. I love it. Flower or edibles?
Oh, flower.
Nanaimo bars or beaver tails?
Nanaimo bars.
Maple Leafs or Senators?
I'm not a hockey person, but at least if I'm in Toronto, there's better restaurants.
Favorite place to consume?
Literally anywhere. We're in Canada.
Favorite cannabis product on the market right now?
Black market jealousy.
Oh, that sounds good. Best munchie snack?
Reese's peanut butter cups.
And finally, describe your perfect 420.
Definitely on a beach, definitely in a place where weed is legal.
But like you said, it's Canada and it's legal everywhere, so it's pretty good to smoke everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah. It's the best. It's that, like, if only for that.
Speaking of, what are you toking on right now? What are you enjoying there?
This is either, I don't know what I picked up. This is Jealousy.
Ah, very appropriate, very appropriate.
I brought home Jealousy and Upside Down Cake. Black Market's a great company from BC, actually. Really great guys. We did a tour of BC over the summer with a couple of our senior leaders just to see the facilities where we saw like a huge one. We saw some micros. And honestly, the Black Market tour was the last one, and I was exhausted by then, but it was unreal. It's one of the most expensive brands on the market, but it's one of those things that's like, it's worth it.
100%. We're actually really lucky to have a couple of Black Market's products over here on our medical market.
Nice.
They're rebranded as the brand Cultiva. And so they're on our medical market here, and we've had Baccio Gelato, Leanne Womack, and a few others. And listeners from Australia here will be very familiar with the high quality, you know, the terpene, the aromas, all that come with those products. And we're pretty lucky. It's only about $15 a gram here. So given that it's pretty expensive over in Canada, it's been shipped over here, it's relatively fresh, we're doing all right.
Yeah, we sell like a pre-roll for $15.75.
Yep.
So like Canadian. I don't know if it's like comparable, right?
Yeah, the exchange rate's pretty much, 90 cents to the dollar kind of thing. So I always just kind of consider it to be the same.
Yeah.
We have quite a lot of Canadian cannabis on our medical market here, some better than others, but yeah, that is one of the better ones. So glad that we've got that little connection there.
Yeah.
So let's now talk about your work with NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Can you first tell us a little bit of the history of NORML in Canada?
Yeah, so NORML was established in 1978, just a couple years after the US one was established. And it's basically carried forward to now today. We're just over 40 years. I'm bad at math, but I went to community college, so math is not my strong suit.
We're coming up on 44 years this year.
That's it. Yeah. So it's like,
oh God, I'm bad at math too. I'm a school teacher. It is 40. It's coming up on 46 years. Hey, couple of stoners. I don't have an excuse though. I haven't consumed today. Maybe that's my problem.
It's getting old. But you know, in the same way that NORML Canada operates as a chapter for the whole country, whereas there's probably hundreds of chapters in the US and many more around the world as well. So we are for the whole country, even though we don't really have representation in every province, unfortunately. We do have a few across the country though. And basically we've been fighting for legalization. And then now that we won that and NORML had a heavy hand in help and advising on that, we're at the point where we need to tweak the rules a little bit to be more common sense and more practical and just sort of remove red tape from that doesn't serve anyone at all. And there's no, I mean, I'm sure it was made with the best of intentions, but it's time to tweak it a little bit.
Oh, there's still work to be done. Yeah.
There's definitely, I mean, province to province, that's a little bit different in how the stores operate and the politics there. The OCS, for example, that's all a little bit separate. But federally, there's, a few things that have a sort of umbrella for everybody that just sort of need to be revisited. Like excise tax is a big one. I don't know if you guys have concentrates there.
We've just had a couple hit our medical market, so it's a very early days. There's some temple balls, some diamonds, very, very limited in that product section of the market, but we're getting there.
But so are we, and the reason why is because there's an exorbitant excise tax put on the production of cannabis. It's not math that makes sense anymore. The math was based on cannabis being double the price that it is now. So now that we sort of just need to adjust down because it's killing really high quality producers because they're not able to pay their tax bills and have to go out of business, unfortunately. And so that needs to be revisited so that we can especially keep high quality small producers in business and support, especially post COVID, where this is another sort of layer to it. There were government loans that were given to a lot of these. I mean, we had a government loan. Lots of small businesses across the country got these government loans that all just had to be paid back last week. So it's everybody's really hurting, like with different layers, because, you know, banking's an issue because of, I think, mostly foreign trade and issues with that because it's not federally legal everywhere. But that's stupid. So
I mean, essentially, we're looking at basically the banks are scared that they're going to annoy the Americans, aren't they? Like that by taking on cannabis money, that the US banks are going to be offended and upset, and other international organizations. And it's like, you're leading the way here on legalization. Why not lead the way on banking too?
Yeah. So there's a few things there that sort of NORML now needs to work on, specifically just sort of pointing out those things. And you know, I will be honest, we've done Health Canada consultations as a group. I've been working with MPs on various projects to just push the right things along. And I will say we have like a group of super, even the conservative ones, really responsive and like reasonable MPs working that want to improve things because, I mean, they get it. They're not, you know, like it's a fairly young caucus. So, I mean, there's exceptions to that, sure. But it's right now, NORML's job has sort of evolved from fighting for legalization to just finding the path of least resistance and the most middle ground that we can. And it's not just us, like there's also like a paid lobbyist group that works on sort of specifically LP related stuff. And then there's various like provincial groups for different levels. Like there's people are starting to organize a lot more just because during COVID, the cannabis file was really set aside because they were like, look, we just gave you what you wanted. Can we focus on the national health crisis?
Take what you can get, guys. Enjoy it. Leave us alone.
Yeah. But now they've sort of seen the absurdity of how, you know, it just, I mean, yeah, businesses shouldn't be closing at the rate they are in this new market. And yes, there are bad business operators. There are people who shouldn't own businesses or maybe chose the wrong location. But there's also like a lot of opportunity that gets lost because of just stupid rules that don't make sense, you know, like having cameras on your empty field of cannabis, but you have to pay for these crazy cameras, like even when it's not growing. And as a retailer, same thing, we have to also abide by the federal rules as well. Excuse me. A big one that we're working on at NORML right now is the edibles limit. I think that it's just a bit misguided. So like our edibles come like this.
Yep.
Like this is
heavily packaged 10 milligram limit in the bag, which is great for a first time user. Like for me, even for me as a high tolerance smoker, love a 10 milligram edible. Don't need anything more. Yeah. But lots of people do need more.
1,000%. But even still, like there's cannabis carry limits and the edible limit being like 10 milligrams per bag. Like, why not? Like, why are we going through this much packaging for 2 gummies?
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? It's so much unrecyclable packaging for 2 gummies.
These are sort of the little things that are going to put people out of business because why are we spending that much on packaging for 2 gummies?
Yeah.
You know what happens if you are an adult and you know your limit's 2 gummies? Guess what will happen after? You'll just close the bag and come back later.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like you're gonna like gummy yourself to death.
And conversely, like, people that want higher limit gummies aren't just gonna go, oh, well, the government won't let me, so I'll never have them again. They're gonna find a black market or, you know, an off market source.
Well, exactly. This is just helping the black market flourish.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. You know, the biggest goals with legalization in Canada were to keep it out of the hands of kids, no problem, or keep it out of the hands of people that shouldn't have it for whatever reason, whatever, no problem. And to also eliminate the unregulated market. And I mean, my point is like us who operated pre-legalization, the way to eliminate an unregulated market is to include it as much as you can. And this is what Canadians want. Like, not everybody is like me. Like, I could have like obviously 2 packs of gummies and be very chatty, but 5 packs of gummies, I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
Like, I've had enough, you know, but I'm not. That's it. That's the worst part of it. So
that is the thing. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen is that you go to bed.
Exactly. So like kids need to like, you know, are they afraid that having 1 jar of gummies versus having 10 packs that are this big in your cupboard? Like what's more dangerous for a kid? Like if he can open 1, he can open up 10.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know. So we actually have a petition now and we're at like 28 or 2,900 signatures. And it goes until March. It only needed 500 to get presented. So it's going to be presented in the House of Commons to lift that to, yes, 10 milligram servings, which it was always meant. Like, I agree, 10 milligrams is a fair serving, and like 5 milligrams is half a serving.
Yeah.
You know, like that's fine, but more servings per pack.
Yeah,
Like,
well, especially having worked at a liquor store in Vancouver, and you know, someone could roll up and spend $5,000 on whatever booze they want for a massive party. Yet someone walks into a cannabis store and they can get the equivalent of 30 grams per day, and you know, I think 5 or 6 packets of gummies count as that 30 grams per day. So, you know, people were able to buy 5 infused drinks, whereas again, you go to the liquor store, get what you want. So I think this is really the case in point I want my Australian listeners to understand is 5 years into legalization in Canada, there are still things worth fighting for. There's a lot to celebrate, and I think you present a really good balance there where you're proud of what you've got and you're grateful for the changes that are made, but you know there are still areas for improvement in packaging, in edible limits. And this edible petition you've got going, you know, the name has eluded me, but it's sponsored by a member of parliament, isn't it? You know, they're really helping you build this profile.
Yes. So we have something called the Cannabis Caucus, and it is 2 Liberals, 1 NDP, and 1 Conservative.
Right.
So there's a fair view from everybody about what needs to go forward, and luckily they're very like understanding of what we're trying to do. Like it's sort of in the packaging alone, we could just save a little bit there. Like that is an environmental thing. It's just like, nobody's died. You know, like if I want to buy it, because it's at 30 grams, but you can go and come back.
Yes.
So
yeah, you can go to a different store. No one's actually checking this.
Nobody, I mean, you run the risk of being pulled over, but if you go home with your 30 grams and then go out to another store, like it's really a weird sort of dumb rule. But the gummy rule is, I think it's fair and it's like common sense. Like just let adults have however much they want. And then we hope to do the same thing with the excise tax stuff next, is because this is sort of a do or die situation. We felt like the edibles were sort of low hanging fruit because I just had a feeling that there was a lot more sort of receptive to going forward, especially as the edibles have become a really preferred way to use cannabis because it's not smoking, it's discreet, people use a lot less, it's being processed differently. So
I've had to kind of come around to the prevalence of edibles in that regard because I prefer inhalation as my main way of consuming, but edibles is definitely something that's coming up as a great way for people to tiptoe into cannabis. We just had, I think, about 7,000 people surveyed in Australia about federal legalization, and the majority of those surveyed prefer edible consumption. So I've really had to readjust my beliefs and my thoughts about this because I do think it is a great way for people to enter the market. You know, I've got friends of mine who wouldn't touch a joint with a 10-foot pole. They're like, oh, those gummies look pretty delicious.
A fun fact is we're actually the #1 drink seller in the country, or at least we were at some point. And so like we sell a lot of drinks because this is another sort of like adult approachable way. Like I've found myself to be like, I like to have a social cocktail, but as I'm getting a little bit older, I'm just like not into drinking as much. And there's drinks on the market that taste better than alcohol, and 100%. I still feel the same adult relaxed feeling.
Yeah. Well, I really loved going camping with a cooler full of Mollos. You know, my friends are drinking real beers, I'm drinking Mollos. Who's got a hangover the next day? Not me.
No, exactly. There's some really good ones on like that's a funny one because that's, for those who don't know, that's a beer.
Yeah.
That's a cannabis but it tastes like beer. But there's some really great fruity drinks. There's like some really good, I mean, if you're okay with sugar, there's a really good root beer, but if you're not okay with sugar, there's really good seltzers. And none of them, I mean, some of them taste skunky, but most of them don't taste like any distillate or anything too much. At the very beginning in the experimental phase, there were some really bad ones, and it's the same with edibles too. Like the quality of that, like this is like a blue raspberry gummy. Like I'm an adult, but I'll tell you, adults love blue raspberry.
Yes.
There is no, it's crazy how much people love blue raspberry, anything like that. Adults love. So the quality has gotten really, really good. So it's like a real shame if these companies can't stay in business because nobody wants just 10 milligrams at a time. This is like for the viability of the industry. There's a few public companies, but it's a lot of private small guys that just need a chance to survive. And we're also like one of the only federally legal and definitely like at this point in the G7. So like we're really setting an example for how others can operate, because 10 years in, we might be able to travel to somewhere in Europe, like other than, I mean, I love Amsterdam, don't get me wrong, but even their system is not perfect, you know?
No, it's far from the model that we want to replicate it. And they're seeing it there, you know, like it's not something the locals enjoy. It's really just a tourist trap situation. And it's not a rich culture of cannabis engagement like we see in Canada. So Canada definitely does provide a good model. And I think as we head towards the end of the show, it leads me really well into the last question, which is, what can the rest of the world learn from Canada's approach to legalization? You know, you've celebrated that there are some things being done right, and I think it's really important to focus on that and not just go, oh, it's all terrible, we need to fix these 8 things. There's some really good stuff there. So what could we learn from some of the successes? And I mean, what's something we could even just straight away not do to avoid, you know, the kind of 5-year fight that you're already involved in?
Have the supply chain ready before you start retail, and support the businesses that are the early adopters, but also support the businesses the whole way through. Like if this is a real financial thing that countries want to be able to benefit from, if you want better roads, better healthcare, better whatever, and there's a real industry that is viable for you, I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to shy away. Like I would at least get to the point where Canada is in a lot of ways. But I also would say look at other sort of mature states as well, like California, because if Canada had more Californian laws, it would be a lot easier to operate as a business and as an industry. And even if you don't want to see it as an industry, the thing is the industry will be there regardless. So accept that the black market or the unregulated market is going to exist as long as you don't include it properly. So find ways to clear that path for people who want to get into this industry, who have legitimate experience, and before big money and investors. New York did a great job with that, actually. So at our business, what we do is we guarantee interviews to anybody who has cannabis convictions or any drug convictions, because I think that experience is invaluable, and I think that that needs to be appreciated at a governmental level. I would also say that a big positive thing that you can take from Canada is that it's okay to trust small business owners with this big task, because that is what is carrying the industry at this point.
Now, as we get to the very end of the show, it's now time for a segment called Pauls of Wisdom. And while we value the long form conversation, we now try to leave the listener with one key takeaway, dinner party fact, or perhaps even a call to action. So Jennawae, what is your Paul of Wisdom?
I would say, well, that's a tough question. I would say that engaging with the public about what they want is the most important thing. And to go with more evidence-based legislation versus sort of emotional legislation. I think if people in Australia can really approach this from a scientific point of view, Australia could be the leader in cannabis. Like, you just need to build on what has already been established, and also just look at other countries, because it's not just Canada. There are some great things about every country, but what's great about this point is that you can see it with a lot of optimism and a lot of opportunity.
That's outstanding. Evidence over emotion. I really, really like that. Well, I'm really appreciative of your time today. I think it's vital that we, on each side of the world, know what's going down with cannabis so that we can learn from what's going on as we tiptoe towards legalization. I don't know when we're going to get there. Our medical field, or our medical program, is very accessible. It's a little bit cost prohibitive, but most people can find a way to get involved in medical cannabis here, which is really fantastic. It's clear there's no time for complacency, and the fight always continues, as you've proven today. So best of luck with the business and also your continued fight for reform with NORML.
Thank you.
Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations is written and produced by me, Paul. Music written and produced by Big Mike. Follow us on Instagram @GiveAndToke, or get in touch by emailing giveandtoke@gmail.com. All opinions expressed by program guests are solely their current opinions and do not necessarily reflect the position of Give and Toke. Content discussed in this show does not constitute medical advice. Cannabis is not legal everywhere, so please be aware of local laws.